and welcome to Cherry Talks Movies. This time around I've got a couple of deep cut, hidden gem movies that Imprint have released in February, and I thought I'd talk about them. Now, Imprint sent me a number of good things over the last few months. They did apologise for sending me the Baywatch box set, but we've forgiven them that, and they then sent me two movies, one of which I'd already seen, one of which I'd never even heard about, but both of which are really interesting pieces of mid-20th century American cinema. Before we get started, please forgive me, I still have a sinus infection that's giving me a bit of hell. Seeing the doctor this afternoon, nothing spicy about it. It's not the big COVID, but I am feeling slightly under the weather, so again, I apologise up front. So let's talk about the first one, 1967. It's an interesting movie in the careers of a number of its participants, directed by a very interesting director called Otto Preminger. Otto Preminger made a diverse lot of movies. His filmography is all over the shop in the best possible way. He started out doing things like Laura in the 1940s, and by the late 1960s he was making a movie where Jackie Gleason drops acid. You got to like a guy for that. He made a number of films I like a lot. 1962 he made Advised Consent about American politics. He made Carmen Jones, a all-black version of Bizet's Carmen, and he made Exodus and a number of other movies. But this one is kind of an oddity in his career because some of the casting choices are a little bit lateral here. When you think 1946 Deep South rural Southern Gothic drama, the first person to play a guy who used to work on shrimp boats but is now trying to build a business and has a wealthy Southern wife. You don't really think of Michael Caine as the guy for that role, but sure enough, Hurry Sundown has Michael Caine playing a Southern wannabe gentleman, and it's hilarious. Michael Caine's accent is the perfect balance for Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins. It's not good. He kind of mumbles his dialogue a little bit because he's uncertain about the accent. I can understand that.
I know him, Mr. Elwell. We just been held up a bit on account of both those farmer boys been off fighting the war.
Now, the choice of Michael Caine, of course, is why would you? I mean, of course, Michael Caine was really big. He made the Press File, he made Alfie, he'd made Zulu. He was the guy to go to if you want to have a big budget picture and have it financed quite easily. But playing a gentleman in the Deep South isn't really something he does well. Henry is married to a woman from an old Southern family, played by Jane Fonda, who again is not somebody you think to play a Southern belle, but she does a slightly better job of it than Michael Caine does. Now, they want to make money and they want to sell their land, and they want another 2 parcels of land to sell to an enormous canning company that's doing large-scale agriculture. And in order to do that, they have to get 2 plots of land owned by a guy called Rad, played by John Phillip Law, who's just come back from the war, and another plot of land owned by another man called Reeve, played by Robert Hooks, who was also in the war but has come back to nurse his ailing mother, who was the wet nurse to Jane Fonda's character back when Jane Fonda's character's family were prominent and they could kind of outsource breastfeeding their children. Now, Henry wants the land and he wants to get it as cheap as possible. Michael Caine and Jane Fonda have a kind of learning disabled son, and Rad, the character played by John Phillip Law, has 4 children and a beautiful wife, played in the first film role by Faye Dunaway. And Faye Dunaway is really good in this movie. Meanwhile, Reeve has renewed an acquaintanceship with a school teacher played by Dianne Carroll, and they're just kind of starting their relationship. And so Rad and Reeve bond together, deciding to improve their land and to hold off the attempts to buy their land. So it's like big agriculture versus small farm agriculture in 1940s American South. Now, apparently some people had an issue with this in the movie because Rad is white and Reeve is black, and black and white people getting together as equals kind of messed with the heads of all the racists, and there are about 87 racists in this movie, one of which is a local judge, played wonderfully by Burgess Meredith, who is having a lot of fun with the role.
I'm Burgess Meredith, and I am also an authority on Hurry Sundown.
Gets to say some really egregiously racist things about people. On the other side of things, you get the black community and some interesting characters in there. The actors don't necessarily get long bits, but they make the most of their moments. One of whom is called the Professor, and he is played by Rex Ingram. And if you know your film, you know that Rex Ingram played the genie in the wonderful 1940 Alexander Korda version of Thief of Baghdad. He's the enormous genie that gives Cebu sausages. And here we are 28 years later, and you've got Rex Ingram playing quite wonderfully a kind of elder of the black community. So you've got that, but then you've also got the other elements you need for a Southern Gothic story. You get kind of hot and sexy stuff. Things get hot and steamy between Michael Caine and Jane Fonda in this one. And also between Phillip Law and Faye Dunaway. And also, I forgot to mention, the local sheriff is played by George Kennedy. So you've got all these character actors turning up in things. And of course it ends up, there's a big court case about who owns the land and whether Jane Fonda can take the land away from Robert Hooks because her family originally owned the land. But after the Civil War, the family of the Robert Hooks character, Reeve, bought the land in free auction and owned it, and there's some documents relating to that which the judge is inclined to dismiss. And the cool thing there is you get a nice bit of courtroom scene. Otto Preminger, the director, actually studied law, so he had a fascination with the courtroom scenes. And the two lawyers are played by Robert Reed on one side, the father from the Brady Bunch, and then in a wonderfully scene-stealing role, you get Jim Backus coming in playing the lawyer who is hired to represent Reeve. And he has a wonderful back and forth between his character and the judge, played by Burgess Meredith.
Are you aware, sir, how extraordinary it is for a white man to come into my court and represent a black boy?
Well, no more than it was for my daddy to present me with a Negro half-brother.
Don't you rattle your skeleton in my court there, sir.
There are moments of this movie that you can really love because of the actors playing the roles. Michael Caine is one of them. So this is kind of over the top of Southern Gothic. It takes itself desperately seriously, leaving aside those light moments when people like Jim Backus come in. Hurry Sundown is a movie not to be taken seriously, but to be enjoyed for how gloriously bad it is. It really has a lot of fun to it, and it is a nice introduction to the career of Otto Preminger. Now, Imprint have put out a really lovely box of this with a slipcover. I'm not too keen on the colours, but on the other hand, those are the colours of the original poster. There's some original artwork on the inside cover, and there are, of course, all of the good extras that you get with Imprint volumes. You get an audio commentary about film historian Daniel Kremer, featuring actor Robert Hooks, and that was done in 2023. You get a video film essay by Daniel Kremer about the life and career of Otto Preminger, which compares and contrasts him with Stanley Kramer. And they kind of tag teamed and did similar themed movies all along their careers. And Daniel Kremer gives us a little bit of that. There's a really interesting documentary about Otto Preminger, which is basically an interview with Peter Bogdanovich about the career of Otto Preminger, which for film buffs like me is really worthwhile. On the inside you get a little bit of the artwork, and again a nice slipcover. But just to summarise on Hurry Sundown, it didn't do particularly well at the box office. Michael Caine being woefully miscast. The supporting cast is pretty good. Jane Fonda does okay. Dianne, Carroll, Robert Hooks, Faye Dunaway, Burgess Meredith, and some of the smaller actors in there like Madeline Sherwood and George Kennedy do some really nice work in there as well. It should have a trigger warning. There are a lot of words used in this movie which are no longer acceptable. And there are also one or two flags which send up a red flag, let's say. Again, it's Preminger, who definitely was a left-wing. He had relationships with women of colour in his life, and he was, in a clumsy kind of way, trying to represent a more enlightened view, let's say, of race relations. The other interesting thing about the film is it's filmed in 1967 in the Deep South with a mixed race cast and crew, and they had enormous trouble with the production. Tires were slashed on cars, shots were fired, the KKK made itself known to the people who were making the movie, It was a difficult and sometimes dangerous movie to make in some very odd and kind of disgusting ways. But you should check that one out. It's currently available from Imprint, and it's a recommend from me as a hidden gem and as a movie to be watched slowly with your tongue in your cheek and not expecting to have the best cinematic experience in the world, but having an entertaining one. The decade or so after the end of World War II was an interesting time for American movie studios because they made a lot of money in European cinemas, but because of the local laws and because the countries were rebuilding after the unpleasantness of the 1940s, there was a lot of money that could only be spent in the countries where it was made. So England had a whole bunch of money that was owned by the movie studios, but they couldn't export it. And Europe was the same. So a whole bunch of movies were made in England and Europe by American mainstream studios in order to turn that money into a film and then be able to show it to American audiences and get the money back in a complicated monetary way that I don't understand. So we get a whole bunch of movies with big American stars but shot in Europe. And this one I'd never heard about, which is kind of rare because I've heard about most things. It's a little film that Imprint have put out. It's 198 in their Imprint series. It's a film called The Mountain with Spencer Tracy and Robert Wagner. It was made in 1956, directed by Edward Dmytryk. And it's the story of Zachary Teller, a retired mountain climber played by Spencer Tracy, who has a younger brother played by Robert Wagner. Now, Robert Wagner was 30 years younger than Spencer Tracy, which makes the dynamic feel a bit sus, but it was the 1950s and it was American cinema, so we'll let that go. Now, Chris, the younger brother, is a bit of a dickhead. He makes a little bit of money on the side by being basically a gigolo, and we see a little scene towards the start of the movie where that happens. Now, when a passenger plane travelling between Calcutta and Paris crashes in the Alps nearby, Chris wants to go and climb the mountain and basically tomb rob all of the people on top of the mountain. They have cash, they have cameras, they have jewelry, they have all sorts of things. And Chris wants to pick that up as a kind of salvage in order to finance the lifestyle to which he would like to become accustomed. Now, he can't get up the mountain by himself. He knows that he's a mountain climber, but his brother Zachary has climbed the mountain 6 times. And even though he hasn't climbed it in 10 years, he's the expert on the mountain. And after a professional salvage crew failed to reach the aeroplane on the top of the mountain, Chris basically badgers Zachary into taking him up the mountain so that they can get the money and improve their farm and improve their life. They have a farm that's been in the family for over 200 years, and so Chris decides to get the money from the aeroplane as an alternate means of funding his life. So the two brothers ascend the mountain together, and at the top they find things aren't quite what they thought they were. I mean, Chris never had a moral compass. Spencer Tracy and Robert Wagner had worked together previously on Broken Lance. They got on well together, and so they made this movie for the studio. This was an interesting time in a bad way in Spencer Tracy's life. He was a binge alcohol drinker. He had depression issues. He wasn't always in a good way, and to be honest with you, he doesn't look like the sort of guy that could climb a flight of stairs, let alone a mountain. But we're talking about Spencer Tracy here, and he specialized in these kind of roles, playing methodically thinking men of honor who have a certain set of skills, but not in a Liam Neeson kind of way, and who ultimately prevail because of their integrity and their sense of who they are. And he does a wonderful job of playing Zachary. He's a quiet man living in the mountains. He has a flock of sheep he takes up to the alpine meadows. He has a woman in the village called Maria, played by Claire Trevor, who's a widow, who's interested in Zachary, and they've kind of got a really cute relationship, which I really love the moments they have together in this movie. These two professional actors really sell the story and sell the kind of back and forth between the characters. There's the local priest, played by William Demarest, who was in My Three Sons. Not the kind of guy who would be a go-to to play a priest, but he does a nice job of it. And you get other character actors turning up. We get Harry Towns turning up as a friend of Zachary's. And you also get E.G. Marshall in an early role playing one of the mountaineers. Now, Robert Wagner as Chris is a kind of arsehole. In fact, not a kind of arsehole, he is an arsehole. He's selfish and kind of spoiled Even though his brother didn't spoil him, Zachary raised him because his mother died in childbirth and his father was already dead at the time he was born. And so he basically thinks, he's got a sense of entitlement that plays very familiar to a modern audience. And he's also a kind of young, brash guy who overestimates his own skills and talents. And that makes an interesting dynamic. You have the slow, methodical Zachary, and you've got Chris, who's basically waiting for someone to light his blue touch paper so he can explode. Both of them ascend the mountains. Zachary doing it so his brother doesn't die on the mountain, and Chris doing it because he wants the money. There's back and forth between them as they climb the mountain, and all of this was shot on location, by the way, in and around Chamonix in the French Alps. And the locations are beautiful. They're fantastic looking locations. The mountains and the mountain climbing scenes are great. There were some bits that were done on the studio backlot, but for the most part, the locations really nail this very simple story. We get another one of those Spencer Tracy roles where he's a man of integrity. It reminded me in some ways of his version of The Old Man and the Sea, the Hemingway story, which was made not too many years later. And Tracy specialised in these kind of stories at a certain time in his career, playing men of honour who are wise and knowledgeable, but who persevere and endure under circumstances which can be incredibly difficult. And I like him in this movie, particularly at the end, where the third act takes a twist. And there's more to the situation than either Zachary or Chris know. It's a grueling film in some ways. I mean, the stress of climbing mountains, particularly just two people with pitons and ropes climbing mountains, is beautifully evoked in this movie. It is a gritty little film. It doesn't do over-the-top showy like Cliffhanger does, for instance, or The Eiger Sanction. This one has a groundedness and has a kind of grassroots feel to it that makes it really interesting. It's not a movie people talk about. People talk about the flashy roles that Spencer Tracy did. They talk about the comedies he did with Katharine Hepburn. We talk about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. We talk about It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and a number of other ones. But The Mountain is worth checking out. Now, Imprint put out a really nice package with this one. There's the interior cover art, which is kind of cooler than... Well, they're pretty much equally cool, these two. And the extras are good on this one as well. We've got an audio commentary from film historian Howard Berger from 2023. Above the Precipice, actor Robert Wagner remembers 20th Century Fox Spencer Tracy and The Mountain. Now, this is a phone conversation with Robert Wagner that took place late last year. And, he's in his 90s now. But there's enough there that he kind of adds an interesting view of Spencer Tracy as an actor and working with him on location in the mountains of France. And that's really worthwhile. And there's also a 1990 interview with the director Edward Dmytryk about the Hollywood 10 and the blacklist, which affected Dmytryk to a certain extent in the 1950s. But yeah, this one is the kind of stuff that I like Imprint doing, and I like finding out because they really do pop up with some interesting oddities and interesting hidden gems. You think, why did they put out that movie? And then you watch the movie, you go, I know why, because it's a movie that hasn't got enough oxygen and the people aren't talking about enough, but it is still quite interesting and still a part of movie history, another kind of piece in the jigsaw puzzle of middle century Hollywood. I'm going to give this one a higher recommendation than I am for Hurry Sundown. I think that the tight focus on two characters for the most of the film works really well, and Tracy in particular sells his character beautifully. He's exhausted climbing this mountain, but he knows how to conserve his strength. He knows when to rest and how to rest in order to prevail in this. It surprised me how unknown this movie is, and yet how thoroughly entertaining it is. But it's one of these really interesting movies that Tracy did. The other movie it reminds me of in some ways is The Devil at 4 O'Clock, about an island with an exploding volcano. It also has a little bit of the feel of the John J. McCready character from Bad Day at Black Rock, which Tracy did incredibly well. So you should check out The Mountain, and you'll be surprised. I think it's a better film than many other things that got a lot more attention at the time and got a lot more attention in subsequent years. So that's it this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. You can also support the channel by donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/paleocinema. I'm going to go and rest my throat now, but in the meantime, look after yourselves. Stay safe. Watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Try some hidden gems you haven't seen before that maybe are better than you think they are. And I'll catch you next time.